What's going on, everybody? It's your guy, Top 10 Pokemon back, bringing you another Pokemon card auctions of the week recap. It was a busy week for Pokemon card auctions on multiple platforms, including eBay, Alt, Gold, and we saw some mega sales, including a Pikachu Illustrator card, several Black Label cards that I guarantee you have never seen before, so please stay tuned to the very end. You're going to love today's recap. And of course, today's auction recap sponsor is the #1 website for high-end investment-worthy Pokemon cards, lowpopping.com. On lowpopping.com, they feature a massive inventory of high-end and very desirable PSA, BGS, and CGC graded cards, graded booster packs, and tons of sealed product. And even though they specialize in high-end cards, they also have numerous very affordable cards as well. And remember, if you don't have the cash on hand, you can easily trade for the item or items that you must have for your collection. You also have the ability to make offers on just about anything you see for sale, and don't forget they also offer worldwide shipping. So if you are a collector of Pokemon cards, Yu-Gi-Oh cards, or even sealed video games, you have to go check out lowpopping.com. As always, the link to their website will be in the description of this video. Thank you so much for your support. Alright folks, we have a lot to go through. I am very excited about this week's recap, and I think you will be too. Let's get started off with a little bit of sealed product that has been doing very well as of the past week. This case of XY Evolutions booster boxes that sold for $7,258. And if you don't know, Evolutions has been going crazy the past couple of weeks. Not only the cards, but obviously the booster boxes as well. I feel it's because of the incoming 30th anniversary coming up. You know, Evolutions is the 20th anniversary set, so we will keep an eye on Evolutions as a whole for weeks to come. A couple of Japanese Black Labels. Here is a BGS 10 Black Label Umbreon EX from the Terrestrial Festival set that sold for $7,100 this week, along with this Black Label Japanese Drowsy that sold for $621. Now, as you know, the English copy of this card has been doing exceptionally well, especially as a PSA 10, but here you go, a Japanese Black Label, a little over $600. And then we saw this Black Label Japanese Giratina V-Star that sold for $910. Here I bring you several cards from the XY era that I think were very notable this week. Here's a full art Mewtwo EX from Breakthrough as a PSA 10 sold for $355. Here is a full art Seismitoad EX, a card we never really see, sold as a PSA 10 for $410 this week. Here is a full art Manaphy from Breakpoint that sold as a PSA 10 for only $102. It's pretty cheap, if you ask me. Also from Breakpoint, we saw this full art Gyarados EX that sold as a PSA 10 for $366. We also saw from Flashfire a Mega Charizard EX. This is the number 69 card. There's also a secret rare version of this card that looks pretty identical, but this is not the secret rare copy. However, it sold for $1,175. Along with this full art Umbreon EX from Fates Collide that sold as a PSA 10 for $1,025. And then here are a couple of big hitting cards from Ancient Origins. We have this Primal Kyogre EX as a PSA 10 that sold for $2,075, along with this Mega Rayquaza EX that sold for $2,225. On to some vintage cards on eBay. We saw this first edition Chinese base set Alakazam. According to the title, this is a Pop 1 card that sold for $7,100 this week. Here is a first edition Dark Charizard hitting new record heights, at least as high as it's been in the past few years, selling as a PSA 10 for $5,461, along with this Rainbow Energy First Edition Holo that sold for $1,825. Here is a first edition Blaine's Charizard from Gym Challenge that sold for $4,301. And then we saw two of these WotC Black Star promo Lucky Stadium Trainer cards in PSA 10. This one sold for $1,503. The other one sold for $1,528. Here is an unlimited Shining Gyarados from Neo Revelation in PSA 10 that sold for $5,049. And then we saw this Japanese Shining Magikarp also as a PSA 10 that sold for $5,300. Here is a Rockets Mewtwo EX from EX Team Rocket Returns, another set that I think is doing very well considering what's to come. Sold as a PSA 10 for $1,975. Here is a PSA 9 Gold Star Torchic, also from EX Team Rocket Returns, sold for $4,625, along with this PSA 9 Gold Star Gary that sold for $4,700. And we actually have later in this video a PSA 10 copy that's sold that's going to knock your socks off, so stay tuned for that. Here is a reverse hollow Rayquaza from EX Delta Species in PSA 10 that sold for $1,825. And then from Dragons Exalted, we saw this Rayquaza hollow in PSA 10 sell for $5,150. From Heart Gold Soul Silver Unleashed, we have this Kingdra Prime, sold as a PSA 10 for $776, along with this Superior Gengar Prime that sold as a PSA 10 for $2,739. Easily the best Prime card ever made, which isn't saying much because I think Prime cards are the worst. On to the Fanatics Collect weekly auction block, we saw a couple of crystal cards. Here is a Crystal Kingdra from Aquapolis, sold as a PSA 10 for $1,980, along with this Crystal Nidoking that sold for $3,360. Here is a PSA 10 Moonbryon VMAX selling for $2,280. This card continues to slip little by little, week after week, after being hyped like crazy, of course. Here is a CGC 10 Pristine First Edition Dark Charizard that sold for $4,920, which is very impressive. Not quite as impressive as that PSA 10 example we saw, but still very good. Up next, we saw two cards from the Topps Chrome series. Here is a Spectra Charizard in PSA 10 that sold for $1,620, and then the Sparkle Charizard sold for $8,100. So that is quite a price disparity between the Spectra and the Sparkle cards. Here we have a CGC 10 Pristine Mario Luigi full art card that sold for $9,900, extremely close to a five-figure card as a CGC 10 Pristine. And then lastly on Fanatics, we have the 7,200 point Japanese Daisuke Club promo Umbreon card, sold as a PSA 10 for $27,600. Big ones. On to some auctions that occurred on Alt. We have this Dialga from Call of Legends. I do love me some Call of Legends. This card sold as a PSA 10 for $4,121. Here is a first edition Houndoom from Neo Revelation, sold for $6,660, along with this first edition Light Arcanine from Neo Destiny that sold for $6,547. Here is another crystal card. This one is the Crystal Ho-Oh from Skyridge that sold for $6,720. And then here is another WotC Black Star promo. This one is the Hollow Eevee, an extremely difficult card to get as a PSA 10. It is a very low pop considering how many have been graded. This card sold for $7,001. And then from Neo Discovery, we have the Rookie Umbreon, the Rookie Moonbryon, if you will, selling as a first edition PSA 10 for an even $9,000 this week. And then here we have my favorite Gold Star card of all time. It's that Gold Star Gary again. This one is a PSA 10, however, and sold for an even $18,000. On to the Golden auction block that occurred last week. I saw a couple of lots of graded cards that were very interesting. Here is a lot of 94 PSA 10 cards from the Hidden Fates Shiny Vault, sold for a total of $6,100 last week. Here are 24 PSA graded cards from Neo Destiny. These are all first editions. So pretty much all the hollows and all of the shining cards were graded somewhere between a 6 and a 9. And then the non-hollow cards were sold raw with this lot, and it sold for a total of $10,087. Then here we have a lot of 185 cards from first edition base, 20 of them being graded by PSA, that sold for $17,446. Up next, we saw a couple of very expensive pieces of sealed product. Here is a blister pack, a first edition base featuring the Blastoise art, sold for $6,229, along with the Venusaur art that sold for $6,229 as well. And then check out this Charizard blister that sold for double what the other two are selling for at $12,200 this week. Here we have a 2011 French Call of Legends booster box that sold for $8,845. And then we saw two base 2 booster boxes come by. This one here sold for $11,285. The other one sold for $10,337. And I believe this one here sold for a little bit less because there was a slight tear in the cellophane around this box. So that's probably what hindered the cost. And then up next, we are seeing the rise of the Team Rocket booster boxes, both unlimited and first edition. Here's an unlimited box that sold for $13,420, while the first edition box sold for $20,252. I'm telling you what, folks, Team Rocket to the moon. We'll be doing a separate video on that. Here we have a 2002 Japanese The Town on No Map booster box that sold for $27,207. And then here we have the original 1996 Japanese base set booster box that sold for $34,566. And then check this out, folks. It looks like somebody bought themselves a Japanese base set booster box, opened it up, and graded all 60 packs. And it sold for $32,398. And I was checking out this lot. I believe 45 of those packs graded a PSA 10, while the rest graded a PSA 9. I think there was like one PSA 8. So opening up the box and grading all the packs was not very lucrative in terms of making a profit. The sealed box sold for a couple $1,000s more, so a lot of heartache to go through to make less money, but I guess to each their own. And then we saw several very expensive Japanese full art Pikachus. Here is a 2015 XY Promo Battle Festa event organizer Pikachu as a PSA 10, sold for $15,860. And then we saw several black label Poncho Pikachus. Here is a Mega Charizard Y poncho wearing Pikachu that sold for $15,860, along with this Gyarados poncho wearing Pikachu that also sold for $15,860. And then here we have a black label Charizard X poncho wearing Pikachu that sold for $17,080. Here we have an Ishihara GX Black Star promo, sold for $14,647, along with this CGC10 Disco Hollow Test Print Shadowless Gyarados that was also autographed and sold for $12,200. Here is a CGC10 Shadowless base set Charizard that sold for $9,157. And then here we saw a PSA 8 Japanese Master Key promo card that sold for $22,570. And then here, folks, is that Pikachu Illustrator I was telling you about. This one is a CGC9 Illustrator that sold for $195,200 this week. And then, folks, here are those cards that you've probably never seen before on eBay. Here is a PSA 9 Primal Kyogre EX. This is a competition, an Art Academy competition card, sold for $28,100. Here is a PSA 9 Black and White Rayquaza EX Pokemon Game Show card that sold for $30,000. And then we saw this PSA 10 Gourgeist Art Academy card that sold for $34,500. Then here is a CGC 10 2016 World's Championship #4 trainer card featuring the full art Pikachu, sold for $30,100. And then we saw this BGS 10 2024 World's Championship card, #3 trainer card, that sold for $40,200. Woo! And then the auction of the week might be the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. It happened on Golden Auctions. It is this Cheetozard, which is a 3-inch flamin' hot Cheeto found about 5 to 6 years ago and then has since been preserved in this acrylic case with this custom card behind it, sold for $87,840. What? Now, I have no idea if this was a legitimate sale or not, but let me just say, to bid up to this amount on Golden takes a lot of information on the bidder's part. They give you like a $10,000 threshold, so it's not like eBay where you can just throw a bid for however much and shill it up. It takes a lot of work to do that on Golden. Like I said, don't know if it was legit or not. I do know it is one of the most ridiculous things I have ever seen. But next time you're eating a bag of Cheetos, folks, make sure you look down, because if you see a Pikachu-shaped Cheeto, you might be very wealthy. That concludes the recap, folks. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate it more than you know. That's all I got today, but I will catch you all in my next one.